So, continuing on the vibe of the story that I was written, yesterday I was having a conversation with my dad, and we were chilling. We just went to get some food, and we were chilling, and we were talking. Uh, so, I basically was having a conversation with him about why I decided to come, and kind of like every time he sees me, he has all these ideas, and they're always money making schemes. And I don't want to say scheme, just businesses, right? But for him, he doesn't want to do jack shit. Nothing, 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 nothing. Like literally, for the past 2 months, he's been talking to me about e-commerce. And I looked at him and I was like, if you find me a product, I will be able to build you a site in under a day and set up everything you need from Facebook to Instagram and all that shit. He said, okay, but it's been 2 months, the same conversation. So while I was talking to him about like when he was started talking about the e-commerce business, so basically I started shifting it a bit and I asked him a question and be like, no, when you were to if you were to kind of like take a strong step towards business e-commerce, how would you view something solid that you're relying on to take that step? And the reason I went philosophical is not necessarily because of this, it's just because I really wanted to have him kind of like notice a certain train of thought that he goes through, a certain activity he kind of like engages with, which is just more entertainment than it is actual functionality. Like he would love to see it work, and if he had money, he'd probably like give me the money to actually like set it up or order whatever product and basically do something about it. But he seems to have a beautiful dance, the back and forth between just himself and his ideas. And he's enjoying it. He's worked hard his life and he has a good job. He's a pilot. So everything when it comes to him is more like, I have free time. What do I engage with? So, anyways, so I looked at him. I was like, what? If you were to think of something really solid in your life, how would you think of it and conceptualize it in your head? And then I looked at him, and we just like he looked. He said buildings, and when he said buildings, I said you need to maintain them, right? That's a lot of effort. Nobody wants to do that. It's not as solid as it actually looks. If you leave a building for 2 years, man, it starts like basically deteriorating fast. So it's not necessarily something that's solid. It's something that requires daily effort and intake in order for it to sustain itself. We went back and forth, and eventually I basically said, like, no, you have to look at something natural. And I pointed at like a forest, and I pointed at a tree specifically. Because trees establish themselves very well as they start growing. The goal I was trying to make was because, like, for the longest time, I never knew how to be decisive. And I was explaining to him how I was writing and how I was like trying to think of writing and continuing the story that's in my head. But I wanted to explain to him the whole base of why this is something that's a part of my life. And the fun part is at one point, because I was having this thought process, and I sat and I mentally started kind of like, I would meditate on a concept, which is planting a tree. And when you think of planting a tree, maybe you think of a pot of soil, a bag of soil, stuff like this. I wanted it to be a proper big tree. So you can't use garden tools to actually plant something that sustains itself for like hundreds of years. In Lebanon, we have cedars. North America has the redwoods. The tropics have, I think, cotton trees and a couple of others that are like ginormous and beautiful and like super like grandiose. This is where I'm gonna make the tattoo here of a cotton tree. So I explained to him how I was like I visually saw myself planting a tree and how when the time that I wasn't feeling too well, I ended up basically it came to me while I was trying to like write down how I was feeling, just like to get something out. And the tree basically showed up in front of me, like full grown and all that stuff. And that's where the story kind of starts. And I started telling him the story. And as I was telling him the story, I was recollecting the bits and pieces where I was writing them. because like every single time I did something, for example, it's kind of like new, I went back to the story. And the first 2 years after coming back from like West Africa, for me, were a bit too, were literally like for me ground zero. Like I'd imagine I felt how I can, I found myself a bit anxious when it comes to society. I found myself a bit tentative when it comes to everything I do, which is not normally the case. But like I felt the time that I spent ever since I was a teenager till that time, and everything I was attempting to do and everything I was trying, I felt like I had completely no regard for what the requirements are for something to be successful. I just really thought that I can do it just because I want to do it. I did not consider there's a base formula or base protocol or base understanding or base work, all these things that have to be minimal as you approach something for it to actually succeed. For music, it's the actual training on the instrument or training your voice or just like, fuck man, even like any way you look at the people that are excelling in what they're doing. And when it comes to business, we kind of like created formulas. Our entire education system, the past 30 years, 40 years, when it comes to the bigger universities, are very much an evolution of how you approach business. And I studied business and I studied marketing. And marketing for me was fun, maybe because I understood people more. But I never truly like worked in it, evolved in it, applied it in a way where I can actually just get better and move forward with whatever society has to offer and all that good stuff. Because ultimately, like, all these have to operate within an economy. It's business. So ultimately, my move here was a bit too kind of, I don't want to say unstable, but I just couldn't see clearly anything beyond just the fact that I was kind of like starting fresh. And that's how it felt. I don't know if anyone kind of has read the story Gilgamesh, but the psychological concept or the mythological concept behind Gilgamesh is the hero's journey. And the hero's journey was fairly simple, basically. It's explained and it's used by very much like in storytelling, movie making. It's a very archetypical story. And it's as simple as there's a you, and then there's a need, and then you kind of like go towards it, and then you search for it, and then eventually you find it. And when you find it, you take it, you return, you change, you become you again. And maybe that journey is done once, maybe that journey is done multiple times, but ultimately, it's something that people go through in their life. And the way it's explained as story Gilgamesh is basically he's born and there's a call to adventure. And then he basically leaves the nest. And he adventures and he becomes arrogant and there's a lot of rejection in him and there's a lot of like fights and like stubbornness and all that shit. But then something pivotal happens and he kind of like changes. I think all of us go through that, man. Yeah, it's like we never know what could happen that would change us. It could just be like a beautiful day at the beach where you realize something, or it could just be like sitting in the mountains, or it could be like a fight with somebody you care about, or it could just be like a professor at school telling you did a good job, or someone giving you a promotion. Like pivotal moments in our lives are very much self reflective, they're all about us. And the whole point of the story that I was trying to tell is like an establishment, like, all right, so the hero returned in the hero's journey, right? Because that's what happened. I kind of came back home, and it wasn't the best coming back home ever. Like, in a weird way, all I wanted to do was to be able to come back home and show everyone my success, but kind of like that was the complete opposite. And so as I was here, I was like thinking, what would I do if I were literally that person who, as part of this hero's journey that they describe it, something changed and I come back home, but what exactly comes back home? And then I continued like writing, like if it were up to me right now, since I'm starting from point zero, I want to reestablish things. So I started writing the story in a way where it kind of like establishes things and slowly started dealing with different aspects of establishing something. Because at one point you actually have to trust that whatever it is you're doing is going to go somewhere. And then you have to believe that everything around you is going to change. And then like things would look differently again, or it's the same again. I don't know, whatever works for you. And then after that, you kind of have to deal with some things that are like painful to you. And then after that, you have to kind of like understand what allowed them to be painful. That's like the underbelly of things. And then after that, when you deal with that, you have to go and introduce it to the real world. And then you have to deal with your kind of like, it's not the demons that you're dealing with, it's the past habits that you have that are against your own dynamic that you have to deal with. And ultimately, it rotates back into the whole, like, what you're structuring is going to be the base for the steps forward. So the old world is a structure, and the new world is kind of like the creative part of the structure, the smaller pieces and how they fit. And it was fun because what I explained to you right now took me like an hour yesterday to explain. So I would say I'm more excited to the story. I would stick to the whole writing is fun. And ultimately, my favorite solid structure is a tree because it's ever growing, and basically, the more love you give it, the bigger it gets, or the stronger it gets. And even when you like forget about it, it stays there, resilient and strong. And I would assume everyone's spirit is the same. Let me leave with this. Ernest Hemingway once said, "Man can be destroyed, but not defeated." And the idea is we either admit defeat or we don't. That's basically it. Thank you.